2003 Infiniti QX4. Same 3.5 liter as the Pathfinder and the Frontier. So looks like we got a P1130 swirl control solenoid slash valve. So P1130, pretty common on Nissans. The actual solenoid is right down there for the swirl control valve, the actuator. So what you got to figure out is if it's the actuator or the solenoid. If it's the actuator, obviously you got your problems because it's way under the intake. So it's not impossible, but it's going to be a big job, and you're probably going to tell yourself you should do a lot of other things while you're there. As for the actual solenoid is concerned, it's going to be on this little air box. It even has the diagram right there. So this is that vacuum tank, that black vacuum tank. Goes to the intake. It also splits off and gets to your VIAS control solenoid, as well as connects to your swirl control valve control solenoid. And then you have your swirl control valve control vacuum set check. So we do have a P1130 swirl control valve, and you actually even take a look at the diagram provided by Nissan for you. We start with our vacuum tank. It's this guy right here. It's a black box in the front of the engine, or if it's side mounted 3.5 liter, it might be on the side. But this is specifically for rear-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, Frontiers, QX4s, Pathfinders with the 3.5 engine. So we have our vacuum box, and then that connects to our swirl control solenoid valve, which then hits over to your swirl control valve control vacuum check switch. So if we do that, that's going to be your solenoid. It's going to connect to your air box, but also the check valve. What this actually does is direct vacuum. If it's not working, it's just not going to redirect it. Here's how your solenoid works, or looks and works. Make sure that there's nipples on both ends and then a 90-degree T. It has to look like this or it's not going to function correctly. You'll see that out of this one I have it connected to a vacuum gauge, and it's holding vacuum because it's not open. What you're going to see when I activate the solenoid, you're going to see the vacuum lead because the solenoid is going to switch over. Just like that. So we know, obviously it's new, so we know it was a working solenoid. But if you were to test that and that did not happen, you know that your solenoid is getting stuck. Others will call this the blow test, if you will. You would blow in this end and it will divert up here, and then you would give it power and it would blow out that end. I don't feel like putting my mouth on it, so I use a vacuum gauge. Now, if it does happen to be this part, it's pretty expensive from the dealership. But if you order from AutoZone the EVS 206 and they have it under the EGR vacuum solenoid for whatever reason, you will actually get a Nissan part with the same green connector. So that is perfect. It doesn't get much better. It's still a pretty expensive part, over $100. But it's better than going to the dealership, almost $200. This is about $150 at the parts store, or you can spend $200 at the dealership. So we're gonna take apart. So we're gonna take apart the vacuum tank because this solenoid is sold separately from the vacuum tank. Pretty simple. There's gonna be 2 10mm underneath. Just take those off. I'm using just a 1/4 inch ratchet with a little extension. However, your preference to getting it off, but this is a pretty easy way. So we're gonna start by removing the vacuum tank. Pretty easy, 2 10mm, holding it at the bottom, and that's it. And then a bunch of vacuum hoses going to it. Lift that out the way. Careful not to drop these. Not that you won't ever find them, but who wants to spend their time looking for that when they can just continue forward with the job? So just kind of keep that in mind. Try not to drop them. If you do, it's not the end of the world. There's a skid plate, so usually you get lucky and it catches onto that. Boom. One is going to be longer, one is going to be shorter. If you need to label them, label them. Most hoses are molded where they need to go. What I like to do if it's not molded, use a little white out. Put a dot on one, put a dot where it goes. So, easy enough. You'll remember now. There's gonna be the hose that goes to the other butterfly valve. Goes to the intake. There's gonna be one that's under that goes to the valve underneath the intake. And that is it. So that's your box. All right, so once we have the box removed, we're gonna test the actual mechanism. So once again, our solenoid is right down there. And what we're gonna do is pretty much bypass the whole system and apply vacuum to it and see if anything happens. As you can see, it moves. It responds to vacuum. So if the car was actually giving it vacuum, the mechanism would work and it holds. So since we already tested that the good solenoid, so we're gonna go on and do our test on the solenoid on the vacuum box. It's got 1 10mm in the back. It's much easier to take off as a unit and put together as a unit. So you pull a 10mm apart, swings up, and just lightly pull the sensor out. Caution, there is going to be a little grommet right here.
It could either stay on the actual sensor. There's gonna be a grommet. It can stay on the actual sensor, or it might stay in the box. But make sure 100% that you know where that is, whether it is on the sensor or in the box. Now that we got the new solenoid in, like I said, remember there's the grommet, 10 millimeter. Put the hose that swoops back around to it, back to it, and we know that the solenoid is operating as designed because we've tested it before throwing the part in. A lot of people don't test their new part because they consider it to be new.
Comment on these as well. With these hoses, get white crust in them. So what I want you to do also is disconnect these one at a time and disconnect these so it's open and spray some brake clean and some air through. Nice something with some power to kind of loosen up all that carbon that might be in there. And that sometimes causes restriction, so it's giving the computer false signals, and that sometimes actually fixes the check engine light. Our solenoid was actually stuck, so upon testing, it was not switching over. I showed you guys how to test if the vacuum is switching over or not by applying power to the switch and seeing if it loses vacuum or not, or when you're blowing on it, it changes direction.
Now this code is pretty quick to set, only because this valve is closed at idle. So if it's not working, it usually gets stuck open. Hopefully you probably won't have as many drivability problems if it's stuck open, because the butterflies are open while you're driving. They just close at idle. So this car would pop its check engine light, within a few minutes of idling. It would start to say a pending vote.